Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to see so many of you with us as we kick off March, particularly as the weather's improving. I think more and more people are starting to go outside. Nice for you all to be sat in on a Tuesday morning with us and this conversation today. So welcome. To those who are new, to those who have not met before, a massive welcome to you especially. My name is Matt Baird. I am the founder, host and chair of the Social Housing Roundtable. We've been running this on and off for about 5 years, particularly consistently over the last 3 years, nearly every single Tuesday. This is episode 167, with most of the past episodes recorded and available via YouTube and Spotify, amongst other platforms. So if you are wanting to kind of dive into the back catalogue, I'm just going to mute there. Sorry, there we are. If you are looking to dive into the back catalogue, please feel free to. We'd love to have you with us and to hear your thoughts and ideas on what's come before. All of this is run by my recruitment business, so this is what keeps it running for free. I've been recruiting in the sector for 14 years. If you are looking for recruitment support, please do reach out. This is one of the many kind of social value pieces I deliver and offer. As far as I'm concerned, if you're going to be taking money off tenants by working in recruitment, you need to be doing something with it. And this is just one of the many things I try and do voluntarily. So if you are looking for support in that, please do reach out. And I'm also co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham. So at least have some actual hands-on experience of working on the other side of the table. But I want to kind of get to today's session, which was one that we've been looking to kind of get nailed down for a little while in terms of as a topic, as a session. I'm glad we've been able to get it done very early in the year still. Chris and I met at the Northern Housing Conference last year. I think we'd seen each other on LinkedIn and shared some articles and other things along the lines, but we'd seen the conversation we were going to have. We were talking about recruitment, we were talking about retention, we were talking about a few different ideas. But the thing that came out consistently really through it was burnout of housing officers and of where we are as a sector in terms of the mindset around burnout. And Chris said he was looking to start a community and build a community of people looking to discuss it. I said, well, why not bring it to the round table? Let's kick things off in that arena. You can share what you've done so far, which has been some amazing work and some amazing ideas that have come through. And then collectively, we can see what the appetite is to not just take this forward more broadly, but also have a true conversation around why is it that we are a sector that is almost just, I hate to say apathetic towards it, but as if it's just part of the job now. When people are going to burn out, that's part of it, and then we'll crack on. So without further ado, Chris, I'm going to ask you to come in. Do please kind of bring in your wider thoughts and wider ideas into the ether. As Sue has already done, if you are looking to get involved with it, whilst Chris is sharing his ideas and laying out the conversation, please feel free to put ideas in the chat box. After that, we will be asking anyone who wishes to come forth onto the panel itself, share your ideas and share what your thoughts are. So for now, Chris, I will pass over to you to introduce today's topic and to join today. So welcome.
Thank you, and thank you very much, everyone. And can I just say also, it's wonderful to see so many of you joining me and taking the time out today. Matt and I had a great chat over the last couple of months, and this is something that I feel extremely interested in. I won't be able to fix the problem in total, but I want to try a different approach to see if I can help. So to introduce myself briefly, my name is Chris Garlick. I work for Accent Housing, based primarily in the north, but also in the Midlands and the south regions as well. I'm based in Nottingham. I work in a small satellite branch, and I've got approximately 400 or 500 properties, roughly, that I oversee on a daily basis. You kind of standard housing officer role. I'm in a more of a general role, so I'm covering rents as well as ASB, as well as your general housing queries and everything from lettings, etc. But all with a big supporting team behind me as well, pulling and pushing the strings. But from a frontline housing officer's point of view, I am on the day-to-day, I am right on the coalface. So hopefully there's a few other housing officers here joining me today that know the pressures, and housing managers and whatnot that know what we go through. And so I've been working in housing for 6 years, and I've had the benefit of coming from completely out.
Just a very quick one. A couple of people said they're struggling to hear you. I can hear you all right. I don't know whether there's a mic option or anything, but a couple of people just...
my headset on instead, maybe.
Yeah, let's just quickly jump on and try that one, because a couple of people were struggling. I don't want people to miss what you're sharing today. That was all.
Put my other headset on.
Just a minute, everyone. We will be back. Thank you for those who've highlighted. Let's see whether
you hear me now.
That's perfect. Thanks, Chris.
Thank God for that. All right. So you've missed my boring introduction. So in that case,
We could hear it was just a bit muffled for people. That was all.
okay. Okay, so from my perspective, I have come into housing over 6 years ago, and I found myself in a career where I felt so comfortable from day one, and I haven't had that before. And since coming on board, I've taken on to doing my CIH qualifications, my level 3, and now I've just completed my level 4. And part of the CIH process, when you're doing it at that level in the apprenticeship, is to complete a project. And coming out of this project period, I kind of thought what I want to do is look at housing officer burnout. I've read an awful lot about it in the press, and I wanted to basically have a look and see if there was a particular reason why we were getting this particular situation. And I wanted to speak to housing officers, both current and past, housing managers and frontline staff, and ideally see if there was something that I could find as a point of interest, and could I take it forward as to recommend to the business. Could we try doing something slightly different? And since this initial inception, the idea has kind of exploded, which has been wonderful in a case for me. So now during my project, I went through the initial stages of going through quite in-depth questionnaires with either current colleagues, previous colleagues, both in and outside of the sector, as I've appreciated burnout from also outside of housing as well, having worked in a debt collecting sector for a long time when I came out of school. And very similar issues occurred. And I asked some tough questions. I was asking people in relation to various bits. Have you ever felt the need to speak to mental health first aiders? Do you feel that you're working within the right sector? And a lot of it was based on one particular question. And I said to everybody that took part, if you had the opportunity to leave the housing sector today because you either fell into the sector and you've stayed here for so long, or but do you feel like you can't leave because you're institutionalized, for instance? But I gave people the get out of jail free card. I said, if I could leave you in a position when you could work in a different sector as of today, and I could guarantee you the same money, the same benefits, and you could start tomorrow, would you? And about 65% of the people that took part in the survey said, yeah, I probably would, because I feel I've either got to the point where I feel that I've gone far enough, or I would like a change if I could. And that was concerning. So, but the ones that said they'd stay, what I did was I then went further into the questionnaire and said, look at the CIH's code of ethics that are published online. And I said, can you tell me, do you live within these codes of ethics on your day-to-day life, for instance? Because when I compared them to myself, I looked and thought, well, 9 out of 10 of these sections here, I live by these on a day-to-day basis. And I kind of wondered whether or not that could actually make me a different type of housing officer, or someone that would naturally succeed in this type of role. And I class myself as quite a high functioning housing officer. So I've always wanted something to do. Hence, I'm doing this as well. There's a couple of different things. But I wanted to then say, okay, this is quite interesting. And the answers I was getting would suggest that the people that wanted to stay within the sector have then said, yeah, you know what, I actually live by these ideas. I live by these morals on a day-to-day basis. And that kind of spurred me on to then thinking, okay, could we do something slightly different from recruitment points of view in that case? So now, anybody that has read anything to do with burnout will see that the World Health Organization have declared it as an occupational phenomenon. And I'm glad I've got that word right. That's the first time I've ever been able to pronounce that word correctly. But it is a phenomenon. And people that might have seen Matt's post yesterday in relation to the total cost of unpaid overtime in this country is £31 billion, for instance. And the sector itself seems to, unfortunately, rely to a certain extent on people doing extra work. And naturally, that's a common cause of burnout in itself. And if you're someone who is in my position currently, I enjoy doing a bit of extra work, but I do it in my own time personally. But it's my choice. But it's a phenomenon because people can't put a finger on why we do it. Why do we actually do extra work when we don't have to? Some people like to, some people feel they have to, but others, they feel that there is a pressure there that the work needs to be done. So it's a certain mindset is what I find myself in, but this is purely what I've found. So I am no authority on this whole kind of business. I can only say what I've personally found. But I came across all of this information and thought, I wonder if I would have an opportunity to help people and see if I could come at the problem slightly different. Accent is a fantastically supportive organisation, and they have been to everybody. And they offer so many different things in relation to supporting people, which is great. There's resilience training, there's mental health first aiders, and there's so many different people. I work in an incredibly supportive team who people will come to my aid every time that I need. And I'd hope that I'd offer that same option to everybody else. But there were different things that I thought, could we do something slightly different, for instance? Now, one of the things that I spoke to during my research was I was thinking, I worked with a couple of social workers and asked, we do very similar things from housing and social work, but we're working with very similar customers. And one of the key things that the two social workers I spoke to was there was certain time put inside for things like dedicated peer review sessions, for instance, and actually having time to not sit and talk about your objectives and your targets and how you're doing from a compliance point of view as a main housing officer, but it was actually more time to say, let's sit down for an hour, let's sit down for half an hour a month and just discharge. Give me everything that you've taken off on your shoulders, and so we can provide reassurance, in that case to you more than anything else, to say, great, you've done all that, fantastic, you're a wonderful person in that case to help these people, but it is not your responsibility to take everything on your shoulders. You know, you are helping, but there needs to be time to discharge. So there were a few different recommendations that I put forward as part of my apprenticeship as things that we could do differently on a day-to-day basis. Now, I wanted to then take it one step further. As an individual, I believe, you know, morally, I was put on this planet to do two things: help people and make people smile, you know, frankly, and that's what I want to do on a daily basis. And housing gives me the opportunity to do that on a day-to-day basis. And I want to then help people as much as I possibly can, whether you are a customer or a member of staff or a friend. You know, it's just naturally that what I do on a daily basis. And I thought to myself, I wonder if there was an option here to, instead of looking at large group activities from a housing officer's point of view, and I say housing officers, I mean managers, frontline staff, I'd work with anybody. But if there was someone that was working in this kind of sector and is potentially experiencing burnout, I want to see if I can help you. And I want to try and explore it by creating a forum, which is what I've called Resilient Minds. Now, what I'm trying to do at this moment is effectively look for volunteers that may be in a situation where they're feeling overwhelmed, you know, everything like that, or, you know, you're thinking to yourself, I need to make a change. Something needs to change in this situation. And one of the key things I look at is what's called the pressure and performance curve. And you may or may not have seen it, and a quick Google will confirm what I'm talking about here. But it's a curve that basically reflects day-to-day life in any environment, really. And you will see there is an optimal setting for people to work at. And you're obviously generally working at the top of this curve. You're working at the peak. But then if you look at the curve itself, it will actually see that there is a strain, there is a section of that that's then called, I'm not working in my stretch zone, I'm working in the strain zone. Now you've gone across the peak of this, and at this point, it's like a roller coaster, and it's actually referred to as the zone of delusion. Like, and Matt and I were talking about this before, but it can also be considered similar in gambling. You constantly think, can I get back? I can work my way back. But it's almost a downward trend. And before that, you get to that point, you get to the bottom of that hill, and before you know it, you're in burnout. And suddenly everything's come crashing down. And I want to see if I can work with people that are in that stretch kind of strain period and saying, I recognize there's a problem here. Is there an opportunity here for me to provide some kinds of support? And then by working with people on an intensive basis, instead of your managers, in that case, working on a monthly or however they work on from their supportive basis, I want to see if there's an opportunity here to work with 4 or 5 people initially and provide a more consistent approach to saying, right, every Monday morning, we're going to have 20 minutes. Let's talk about your week. How did the last week go? We looked at a few things that you could do. Now, I don't have all the answers, but what I can tell you is I work in a very structured environment, but that's because that's who I am personally. And I have set goals every Monday morning so that I know what 9 times out of 10 I'm coming into work to talk about. And one person I spoke to many years ago said, I kind of get quite upset. I don't sleep well on a Sunday night because I fear coming into work for what's going to happen. And we all know that every now and then, you know, the stuff can hit the fan on a Monday morning and it blows out the entire day. But my Monday morning is completely structured, as in I've got 8 to 10 tasks that I do every Monday morning that set up the rest of the week. And that's the way I've organised my day. And I want to try and see if there's an opportunity here to try and share some best practice that works for me. And if you've got in that mindset where you think to yourself, I actually need to make a change, I'd love to work with you. I don't have all the answers, I've said a couple of times, but I would love to see if there was something that I could pass on to you that you could then come back to me and say, you know what, those two things didn't help me at all, but that thing, that helped. And actually, yeah, I've actually then thought, I need to look after myself. Now I'm going to look at something called self-care as well, because that's a key thing. It's a massive, massive thing. You know, if you've actually got to look at taking ownership of the situation, taking deliberate action to try and nurture yourself and actually think, yeah, I've recognized there's a problem here. I wonder if there's something I could do here to try and change how I do my day-to-day life. You know, because there's 1400 minutes, give or take, in a day. You spend 500 of those at work, you spend 500 sleeping. You don't want to spend that last 400 working. You want to spend it enjoying family time, getting out, going for a walk, looking after yourself. And it's breaking it down into those little things. Now, I did a time and motion study on myself that lasted for 12 weeks. I think I did it for in the end, but it gave me a breakdown of being able to see, crikey, this is how much I'm actually spending time on. I'm spending a lot of time on traveling, huge amount of time on administration, and a lot of time of trying to speak to customers and whatnot. But I was spending a minuscule amount of time of taking breaks and looking after myself. And it allowed me to then visualize it and say, actually, you know what? Yeah, I've spotted a massive gap there. Why aren't I taking more time and looking after myself? So everybody that looks at self-care, if you ever Google what's happening, for instance, of what you're looking for yourself, you know, if you're actually spending more time looking after yourself and prioritizing, you know, a quick walk at lunchtime, if you have the opportunity, get away from that screen, get some fresh air, eating healthily and whatnot. But if you're in a position where you're able to organize your day so that you already know what's coming to you in the following weeks, months, for instance, then you know, it might be something to look at. So it boosts your mental and your physical health, makes you more productive, improves your relationships massively inside and outside of work. And what I want to say is one thing today is someone told me this a long time ago, that respectfully to every employer that's on the phone at the moment, God forbid if any one of you suffers with burnout and eventually ends up having to leave the organization for whatever particular reason, there will obviously be a grieving period, so to speak. But from your point of view, that could be a life-changing moment for you. But from an employer's point of view, they're going to recruit for your job role in the next couple of days after that, because that job needs to be filled. So and so you've got to think to yourself, more than happy for everybody to be pushing the boat out and doing extra hours and frankly trying to kill yourself to get over the line and get that job done and provide that customer with that great service. And that's what we all do this for. But without you, you're not able to service that customer. It just goes on to the next person. And it's almost kind of getting that resilience to actually think, yeah, you know what, he's right. So I don't want to keep waffling, to be fair, frankly. I'd rather bring together the group and see if there's something we can do. I've shown you what I want to stand for. I'm starting a little bit of something. And if any of you guys on the call today, or if any of your colleagues want to connect with me offline through LinkedIn and see if there's something we can do together, I am quite happy to use my personal time to try and see if I could help you in any possible way. If I could save 2 or 3 people and help you stop getting to the burnout point by making some minor suggestions about little things that I do, to me, that's a success. And although I'm not going to be able to cure the whole thing, who knows, between us, maybe if I could help a couple of you out, you could help a couple of colleagues, and before you know it, we've started our own little pyramid scheme. So and that's why I take a break. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Very much. Yeah. And there's a lot of points going off in the chat already. I will say, if anybody wants to come in, there's a React tab at the bottom. Do please raise hand or come on video, raise it, drop me a message, whatever it looks like, and I'd love to hear from you. Jim has mentioned there that he's been highlighting this upcoming problem in EDI for staff since the start of the white paper. And Hannah has mentioned there, it sounds like reflective group practices, which is great to hear. There's a message sent to me individually, so I'm not going to read out a name, but we said, you know, housing officers tend to be understaffed, overworked, undervalued, not acknowledged. Work gets deliberately sabotaged, passed over on overtime provided, sidelined, isolated, poor team ethics, cover-ups, sidetracked for capability, managed with intentional planned exit, and on it goes. And I think that's the challenge so often, is that, and I guess it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on today, Chris, to have this conversation, is you're doing the job. And I think this is where the difference comes so often is we can have people who come on and talk about, and you go to conferences and you've seen it yourself, people talk about housing officer burnout or whatever that might look like, and it's a chief exec or it's a head of service, whatever else. You're doing this role day to day. And it's been clear through the delivery of what you've said there that your focus and your ethics are around trying to do the best job possible, but you're also very aware how easy it is to burn out. And Jenny's mentioned there that the curve you mentioned, the Yerkes-Dodson curve, there is a lower part of the curve where there isn't enough stress. So your comfort zone, then your peak performance zone where there's positive stress, then there's the burnout zone where there's almost too much stress. And that's the bit we're trying to kind of be very wary of reaching, which is we work in a stressful environment. The role is not one which you can do lightly, but equally, there's a point where suddenly that becomes too much. And it's that balance between the two we need to balance out. So I'm going to go to people with their hands up before we go to more points in the chat. Brian, we've got yourself, then Jim, then Hannah. So I'll pass over to yourself.
Good morning. I understand your comments, Chris, about your previous incarnation. I've been making them phone calls on the sales ledger side as well. In a lot of ways, I think what's happened over the last number of years is targets have been set, goals have been set by organizations, but what they've forgotten about is that the delivery is actually from people on the ground. So where you've got your housing managers, they're given the targets, but they're not given the support. You have situations where you've got a group of people, but they feel that they're out on their own. They feel that they're isolated because their senior or next in line, their line managers are involved in other tasks and simple questions and conversations. And I really like that idea of 20 minutes on a Monday morning. Let's sit down, let's have a chat, let's understand where the week's going and try and move on from that. But them conversations are not necessarily 20 minutes on the Monday morning. They could be 20 minutes on a Friday afternoon. But there's so much pressure to reach, the regulators' goals, the desires of the company or the organization. And I don't think it's just in housing. I think it's in a lot of areas where they forget the people providing the service are the people on the front line, but they give them the goal, but they don't give them the support to go with it. And being able to have that conversation with your supervisor or a senior manager is
I agree there, Brian. I agree. I mean, Matt and I were talking just before offline, and one of the things I found myself getting to a situation of now over the last few years and being more confident is being able to go back to someone and say, "I'm sorry, Brian, I just don't have capacity to do that task to the level that I want to do it at this moment in time. Can I come back to you?" Because I want to be able to set out the kind of what I'm able to do. I know I want to be able to provide a great service to people, and that's what I want to be able to do. But I'm also have become a realist, and if I'm not in a position to give you the service that I want to be known for, it's almost to an extent being able to say no. In that case, that's the biggest thing for me. I was a yes man a long time ago, and probably still am to a certain extent. But I'm now in that position where I'm now saying, "No, Brian, I can't do that job for you today. I just don't have that capacity to do it to the level I want to." But I've then found myself more often than not going back a few days later and saying, "Brian, did you still need it? I'm actually in that position to do it now. And, I've got that capacity and I'm quite happy to give it an hour on Friday to do that job." And it took me a certain amount of confidence to build up that level of being able to say, I feel confident as, I can't do it, but I will come back to you if I have that capacity to do it, because I want to give it to you in the level and the detail that it deserves. So, but it did take time for me to understand that.
Yeah, and you're working in a culture that allows that and embeds that. And I think that's the other side is you talked about Accent Group and the delivery there. So often, unfortunately, what I hear from housing officers I speak to from a recruitment side is that actually they don't get the ability or capacity to do that. It's a case of if you haven't done it, you're failing. If you haven't sorted it out, then you're failing. And it's that mindset that allows me to go, all I'm doing is getting this wrong. Jim, I'm going to bring you in, then we'll go to Hannah.
Okay, well, when the social housing standards review was done, I was actually shortlisted for it and invited to be part of it. And then it went in a different direction with Helen Baker from Shelter. But the ideas I suggested, the one thing I did emphasise was overtraining of staff, that they needed staff training, but how did they get it? How can it be implemented to the detriment of their working day? I also mentioned the fact that although I'm sure housing officers very much like to help and assist, they didn't choose to be social workers, they didn't choose to be surveyors, they didn't choose all these other jobs that are now being brought into them. I asked Richard Blakeway, I asked Jonathan Walters themselves, how would they feel if they came into work in the morning, only to find now that instead of just being over the complaints and all the various regulations, they were now responsible for the staff's well-being, you know, the wages bill, everything else. But don't worry about it. You can feel good about yourself because you're helping it through the tenants. You know, you're going to be helping tenants by doing this. And I think you'll find maybe they agreed that this was not something really. To me, the housing officers now, I've read things and reports in Inside Housing, things where they mentioned about even suicide attempts and things like this, where if you come home at the weekend, you want to be able to relax with your family. You don't want a cynical, not in all cases, but some tenants using this opportunity to get up the ladder, you know, the housing ladder, by saying to them on a Friday afternoon, you know what, I might take my life this weekend, and them not knowing if it's a serious threat. You know, the genuine vulnerable tenants with characteristics should slip through that net. And I think that they're being overreached and being overasked on what to do. And this is why so many are leaving the sector.
Generalise quite that much, Jim, but I get what you're saying. I do see your point, but I think that you can't also just think everything is cynical, because unfortunately then we lose that level of empathy that we so desperately need. But it's about, I can see what you're saying. Hannah, I'm going to bring you in.
Oh, hi, yeah. This really piqued my interest because I thought the Home Encounters report was looking at the interaction between tenant-facing staff, because I can't give away who the case study site was, and so much came out about emotionally informed practices. But a few things to say. One, I think fundamentally this goes back to the issue we've got of a lack of professional identity in the sector, and the need to sort of build a defensible knowledge base and practices that come from that. There's certainly waters we can fish in, social services being one of them, but housing is different. And also we need to be a little bit more on it, I think, in terms of that. So I'm working on stuff there. Two things I'd say I'm cautious about is medicalising a condition that I think could be seen from another perspective as a natural response to like a system that is out of control. So if we focus too much on treating burnout, it's treating the symptom and not the causes. And we're seeing this in a lot of sectors as well. There's just like, you know, people have fled teaching, people have fled social work, people have fled probation because of these similar bonkers pressures that have been going on due to a decline of the welfare state and an over dominance of like market logics. And I thought I would just finish on a bit of a joke as well. What's the difference between a light bulb and an academic? A light bulb stops working when it burns out. So there's some energy there from our sector there. In terms of, I'm looking at similar practices as well. So if there's an interest in sort of like comparing notes and maybe evaluating any attempts that are coming from the grassroots, because this is what interests me here, is this is coming from housing officer grassroots and housing officers who care about tenants, then give me a shout and we'll talk about seeing if we can put our heads together and make this a bit more evaluated. But that's it, over and out. I've got to run off and teach students. Take care, guys.
Thanks, Hannah. Take care. Joe, I'm going to bring you in before going back to Chris, and then we've got a lot of points being raised in the chat as well. But Joe, I'm going to bring you in.
Oh, can you hear me okay? Just checking. Oh, good. Fantastic. I just wanted to say that as we do at Big Picture Training, we go into housing organisations and we deliver customer service training. And often when we're delivering customer service training to front-facing teams, we are delivering it to teams who are suffering from empathy fatigue because there is a level of burnout going on. So on one hand, organisations are asking their teams to show empathy, compassion, but on the other hand, those teams themselves are struggling to be able to do that because of their own emotional well-being. I agree a lot with what Brian and Lucy were saying. Lucy in the chat says there are multiple reasons. She's an ex-social worker now in the housing sector, and one of the positive things within social work was the emphasis on reflective practice. And with housing officers and housing teams now being professionalized. If we are professional, and I always thought we should be professional, because when I was a housing officer, I used to think, why aren't I classed as a professional? I deal with people's lives. Why aren't I classed as a professional? If we are going to be classed as professional, then we need the support and the mentoring and the supervision that professionals receive, such as social workers and financial counsellors, who have professional supervision, who are able to offload and reflect with somebody impartial. And so we should be having that. And some organisations are doing that already. I don't know if there's anyone on this session at the moment who has that in their organisation, professional supervision or mentoring. Certainly, I see it in some organisations in the UK. We also work in Australia, and it happens a lot in Australia. It happens a lot in Australia. It's been recognised. So this is something that I'm really keen to see happen in the sector.
Thank you very much, Jo. And I can see, you know, I'm looking through the chat and trying to kind of collate a lot of really, really fascinating points into kind of themes and things. You know, Marie Jenkins has put there that, you know, this was her years ago as head of service. I wrote a book, Burnout to Bold, in the view to help the sector's middle managers. And I think it's something that, you know, she mentioned later on that emotional intelligence was the thing that improved the well-being. But as you put, Jo, so much of that is about that peer-to-peer support. And I've got CB, apologies, I don't know your name, is just two initials, which is, you know, it sounds like lean efficiency mapping.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
Hannah's put a point in the chat there which is relevant to the research that she highlighted earlier. Paula Rangold has said that actually resilience training provided by my company really helped me, and it's great to see more and more of this coming through. CB said, I think depending on people's personal disposition too, those who want to help and support are empathetic, etc., are the ones who sometimes don't realise they're more likely to, i.e. social workers. And Jenny said, and this is a very important point, we do need to be careful that we distinguish between being stressed or even overwhelmed and actual burnout. When we enter burnout as medical definition, we need to take actual steps to get out of an activated nervous system, to get out of fight or flight and back into rest and digest. When someone's in burnout, they're literally in survival mode. And I know, Chris, that for yourself, when we were discussing this before, I think burnout is becoming a term that is kind of become a little bit wide in its meaning. Like, it should mean exactly what Jenny has alluded to there. But it's also people feeling they're burned out when they're not. They're just so highly stressed, they feel they're burned out. But actually, it's that balance between the two, isn't it? And that's where I think some of your, you know, the mentoring stuff you're looking to try and kind of get involved in, but also that kind of peer-to-peer support side that we're looking to build through this conversation today is very much about that thing of almost preventing things before they get too far down that line, as much as it is helping people who are absolutely burned out.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I just want to get into that position where I can say there is help out there. There's a multitude of help out there anyway. I just wanted to try something different to see if, instead of getting people in a group environment or online learning or various other sectors in relation to mental health first aid, and there are so many different things to try. And with my project, having looked back at press clippings over the last 20 years, there is no dedicated fix for it. But I would say if I could have an opportunity here to work with people on a more permanent basis over a set period of time and actually say, right, let's see if we have a look and see where we are today. Great stuff, fantastic. Where do you think it's going wrong? Can I make some suggestions? But not only that, then being held to account for it, so to speak. We're doing this as an exercise. This isn't just a me talking to you and saying, try something. If you want to try something different, let's actually have a look and physically put it into place. Let's try, and time management was a key thing for me. You know, looking at my time and motion study that I did, I looked at everything and it actually gave me some real points to say, actually, that's a really good point. In that case, I spend far too long doing that. In that case, I could go and do this instead, or could I plan my work days out more efficiently? I know now that when I schedule my estate inspections, for instance, have always done so, I would complete an inspection and then I've got it booked in for 2, 3, 4 months time when I need to go back and do my next. It's already in the diary. So, and I've planned it out in certain ways that's how my day-to-day life is. Then I come in on a Monday morning, I've got 6 or 7 tasks to do straight away. That then can get dropped in through the rest of that week. Bang, it's already there because I'm already going to be on that scheme. Great, fantastic, one less thing to do. And that's the kind of things I'd like to try and share. You know, as I've always said, I don't have the answers to it, but if there was some honest, you know, I'm going to hold you to account of it. If you are looking to change and make an actual difference, then great. Let's set some things in place and let's see, okay, let's do this today on Monday, and actually making taking deliberate actions to actually try and change the way you're working. So, but actually be, you know, I'd like people to come on board and say, yeah, you know, I'm willing to actually try something new and be held to account for it, you know, the following Monday if I haven't done it. And we've got to do so many things. I think to change a routine, didn't they say you've got to do something 90 times deliberately in that case on that basis to actually adjust your structure about how you actually physically work? So if there's an opportunity to explore that, I'd love to have that opportunity to do so.
And I think it ties in a little bit into what Mark Rochester put in the chat, which is I find some people can start off on the back foot. They don't get the initial embedding and training period as there are pressures within the role. And they're trying to learn as well as do the job. It becomes the perfect storm. And I think so often it's about knowing what are those initial basics you've got to get right to then let everything else fall in place. Thank you. I don't know what Alexa's doing there, but thank you very much. But I think that's one of those ones where it's very simple for us to say, oh, you know the basics, so just do that. Actually, you can get the basics right. And Chris, you maybe support with that on this peer-to-peer side can go, well, have you thought of this? Actually, we can just get on top of all of those other bits that seem so daunting. Marie, I know you had your hand up. Do please come in.
So I was just going to say, obviously, I've shared my experience in my book, Burnout to Bold, but that negative period in my life has turned into a positive in terms of me delivering emotional intelligence training within housing associations. And there's 2 elements to emotional intelligence. So there's about self-management and your relationship management. And I think if you can understand more about what your personal feelings are, so looking inwards at your triggers and things like that, then you'll be able to manage them a lot better in terms of your relationships. So yeah, burnout isn't a phenomenon that has to happen. It can be prevented. So yeah, I'm obviously going to plug my book because I've been there. I've got the lived experience. But yeah, I did that purposely so that I could try and prevent this happening to others. And I'm just really pleased that you've touched this subject today, Matt. Thank you.
Oh, it's all right. It was Chris coming forward and suggesting the idea, so you're very, very welcome. I'm going to a few points in the chat, and then I'm going to go to Keith and then Jim, just because we've not heard from Keith yet. But you know, Lucy said there are multiple reasons. I'm an ex-social worker now in the housing sector. One of the positive things within social work, though, was the emphasis on reflective practice, both within the academic learning and in practice itself. Kim has mentioned that in the service that I run, which is a homeless charity, I implemented daily debrief and conversations every day. These conversations usually happen organically or they are fixed by me to happen. People have lives outside of what we do and they turn up and many have a lot going on outside, and it's also cathartic to talk. We also have on-site medical nurse and counsellors, which along with clients, staff have access to. There was a question which came through to you, Chris, which I'll dive to just before I bring in Keith. As a generic housing officer, what do you find works to balance the demands, i.e. spinning plates of the role? How do you prioritise, for example, voids when you have ASB on your patch?
It's a great question, and it comes down to how I basically put my day in. I mean, naturally, often things will just happen as the day goes on, and it's getting that mental capacity to understand that, yeah, things will just hit the fan at times. You have to just assign things to do. But from my perspective, I know I can always say I categorically look at my Monday mornings are set out in a particular way, mainly for compliance-related reasons that I know I need to chase that rest of that week. The Monday afternoons are spent doing certain things, but I often spend a minimum of a couple of days sat at home deliberately doing doing things. Now we do rent Tuesdays here at the moment. In that case, they're put in place. So that gives me the full day. But because I've then booked that entire day out, I know where I've got, as a general house offer, as a generic house offer, I've got 20 odd cases that I review on a weekly basis. You know, they're my high priority cases. But after I've spent 2 to 3 weeks of grinding out and getting that sorted, that's kind of under control, so to speak. It's a quick check-in at that point, and then rent day becomes rent morning, and then Tuesday afternoon gets freed up, but then Friday afternoons I spend a lot of time in there. I have 2 hours put aside to update my ASB action plans. So I will go through. I'd probably have had a conversation with the complainant or the perpetrator during that week, and then I've got specific time set aside on a Friday afternoon that I then know that's my 2 hour block to then sit, write my action plans, get my letters out, for instance. But mentally, from my point of view, I've then looked at it and thought, yes, that's exactly how it should work, because I already know I'm expecting to do that. Now, when I started in housing, I, like everybody else, had a period of, oh my God, how do I manage? My director of HR at the time sent me a book, and I cannot remember the title of it, but he said, read the first 100 pages of this, and this will hopefully help you to crack how to organize your day. And he said his 3 main goals: if the job can be done in under 5 minutes, just do it. Don't wait to do it later, because something else will have happened then and you never get a chance to do it. If you can quickly bang that letter out in the post and it's done, and then you can get it and it's done. And from your mindset point of view, there is no better feeling in life than deleting an email once you've done it, crossing something off that to-do list. You get almost a little dopamine hit in that case, say, wow, I've achieved something. Go on to that next call, go on to that next thing and do it. But if that job's going to take you between 5 minutes and 15, 20 minutes, put some time in the diary and stick to it. Make sure you physically stick to it. But if a job's going to take you any longer than half an hour to do, then it was the book actually suggested, considering, am I the right person to do this? So am I the right person? Do I need to be compiling all this, or do I need to be managing a project to send it elsewhere, or collating some information to bring it together? And it was almost a light bulb moment for me. So now if I've got that quick email to send to that customer that's only going to take me 2 or 3 minutes, I'll do it now. It's great. It's done. And then it's done and dusted and crossed off the list. So I don't think there is any real right way to do it, but the methodology for me is being strict on myself. Mondays are meant for that, Tuesdays are meant for that, Friday afternoons are meant for that, in that case. And that's generally 9 out of 10 weeks, when it hasn't hit the fan. That's what I do, and that's how I plan my day job out. And that's what I do, and I stick to it pretty religiously. So, and I get the job done.
Jay has put in the chat there that she'd love for you to come in and have a conversation with some of her housing officers. So, do please connect with Jay. There's, and I know via LinkedIn is how you and I have connected, but I think there's a real fascinating conversation to be had then. Keith, I'm going to bring you in before I go to some of the other points that are raised in the chat. Good to have you with us today.
That's very kind of you. And Chris, it's lovely to see you. Haven't seen you for a good while, mate. Chris and I used to work together. Matt, that is a massive glass of brandy you seem to be getting through there. That's what it looks like on the screen. I'm sorry if you can't see me. I think my camera's playing up.
But yeah, thanks.
We believe you, mate.
Believe it or not, sitting here getting drunk on a round table is Christmas. So,
just reflecting on what you're saying, there was a couple of points that I just want to make and just ask something. In particular of Chris, you are very much in control of your own destiny by the sounds of things. So you're planning your week yourself. You're not being driven by others. And because you and I have worked together, I know that particularly suits you. But I'm not convinced that exists in lots of other organisations. So I'm in local authority now, whereas I used to work with Chris. And they're not generic housing officers, so they're reliant on an income management team. They're a communal areas team, this team and that team. So there's less sort of greater autonomy in terms of the generic role. Do you recommend having this sort of level of control over your own destiny? And I know you're driven very much sometimes by the tasks coming through the system and things like that. You have your rent Tuesdays and things like that. But outside of that, your routine is quite clear and given. Is that how you make it work for yourself, by having control of your own diary and your own, and being able to set your own priorities?
I'd say massively, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you as well as we both know, Keith, the working for Accent for a long period of time now for us both, that there are a lot of things that come into you on a daily basis that need action in there and then. And so there is a certain amount, a degree of flexibility in the day job. But not only that, from my perspective, I know I try to do as much as I possibly can in the time periods that I'm given. There is no right or wrong way to go about it. Spinning plates is the accurate representation from my point of view in relation to Accent. Eventually eventually something will fall off. It's just a matter of time. It doesn't matter. I've had plates fall off on my own in that case, because I've been doing heavily focused on 7 ASB cases and 15 complaints, and that other compliance plate has dropped off. It's just the nature of the beast. But I will try and do everything within my power to do it. And if I have to do an extra evening to work, for instance, whatever, then it's my choice to do it. But I completely understand what you're saying, though. For specialist housing officers that have less control over their day-to-days, then it's all about finding what works for you. Yeah, really.
Oh.
Thank you very much, and Dan, thanks, Keith. Nice for nice easy to reconnect there. I mean, I can see from some of the points in the chat, I'm trying to jump around a little bit intentionally, but Brian said there that real conversations don't take place on Teams or Zoom, so face-to-face helps with a real understanding of how people feel, and I agree, but sometimes there's also an element of, this conversation wouldn't happen if it wasn't for online. So it's finding the balance between the two. I'm not saying this is better in any way, shape or form, but if it's to nip something in the bud quickly, I think that there's a way we're still learning how to use online platforms like this a little bit. Jenny has said that, as you know, I've talked about burnout and social housing on the roundtable before. There was a brilliant session just before Christmas. Please go and check that one out. Self-care is a really important part of stress reduction, but we do also need to see systemic change in the sector to really make a difference. In the last year, I qualified as a burnout coach, and I now work with individuals to help them identify if they are in fight or flight survival mode, because if so, going back to work in an environment that feels like a threat is going to keep triggering them. And B, what they want and need to do next in their lives to heal from this. Burnout is a medically defined condition and will need significant changes to recover from. And the reason I want to raise that one just before I jump to some of the other points which come further down in the point, because someone had mentioned about time blocking and everyone working differently, which I'll come to in a moment. But when I was looking at this point raised by Jenny, and when I was thinking more broadly, and you talking about your role, Chris, you talk about it very passionately, and you talk about it as if you found the place you're meant to be. And it ties into what Keith was just sharing there, in the fact that you have such empowerment, you have such kind of ability to run things as you feel they need to be run almost. Do you speak to people or others that you spoke to who feel that they're sometimes unable to do the role because they're so regimented, that actually there's a problem in housing and a problem more broadly sometimes in the sector of going, well, actually, if I had the level of freedom you've got in your role, perhaps I would function a bit better and I wouldn't feel so stressed all the time and I would be able to manage my diary and etc. But my business won't allow me to do it, and therefore I'm unable to get, the level of input that, and the level of control over the role I'm doing as I feel I need to get out of the slide or that slide towards burnout or at least high level stress.
It's an odd one. I mean, during the research that I was doing, I spoke to people within and outside of Accent, current and previous, and I didn't get that feeling when I spoke to people in relation to how the difference between a generic and a specialist. But that just potentially just down to the people that I spoke to at the time. It's really interesting. It's something that I will definitely take away and consider whenever I speak to people going forward. And if the role is something specific, then is there some other way that we can explore it? But during the research that I did during my project, that's not something that came up a huge amount. It was more along the lines of a lot of people taking ownership of what they could physically change themselves, and how they felt at the time, and were they receiving the correct levels of support, and could anything more have been done? But it's an interesting thought and something I'll have to take away and think about for sure. So yeah,
I think it's sometimes it's and actually I've had a few people message me like privately in the chat around the businesses they work for. They wish they had the freedoms that you've got a little bit there to be able to, because they feel they'd actually be able to deliver more. And I think it's testament to the culture you've got at Accent, that you've got that level of freedom, but also that they've got that level of trust in you. It's just unfortunately not necessarily the litmus paper right across the sector that's the way that it's run, because sometimes, because we've had such levels of burnout and people going off absent and everything else, managers almost come harder on their team to make sure they're in control of everything. And actually that's just making things 10 times worse, and there needs to be training in terms of management and guidance on that piece. There was let's have a quick look through some of these points in the chat. So Hannah Daly, lots of options out there to help build resilience, but sometimes it can come across as putting a plaster over a broken bone. Employees, like tenants, need to not only be heard, but they need to see organisations taking steps to address concerns and take on board suggestions to improve. Resilience will only ever go so far if you don't feel like you're being heard and or taken seriously. There's replies there from Jenny saying, which is why we need to see systemic change in organizations, or decided on an individual level where this is an environment we can stay in. And Hannah's responded, I think the role can be designed to be appropriate for anyone to succeed in. I just worry that the is this meant for you question will exacerbate an already critical issue in staff retention, and also in hiring a new generation of housing officers. It's an interesting one, that, because I think there's plenty of room for people to succeed in a huge array of roles within housing, but the level of demand, and I think this is something which we maybe don't focus on enough, the level of demand on housing officers is high, and it isn't going to be for everybody, but there is also a huge shortage of staff in the sector. So, you know, and we're desperate to hire more. So, Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that balance between the two of going, well, actually, it is, I can never see a housing officer role not being a stressful position. I don't know about you, but I think it's always going to be.
Yeah, naturally, we deal with terrible things on a day-to-day basis on occasion, which takes a lot of mental capacity. You're taking a lot of strain on housing that particular family, but not only then housing, then supporting going forward. There may be safeguarding for us. There may then be a rent issue, antisocial behaviour issues. So it is a very complex environment. I mean, for me personally, working with people like Keith back in the day, Keith was always able to help me understand situations. He helped me to understand ASB. I worked with him from a point of view of being able to get to grips with what I can and can't do to help people. And Accent have a very open way in relation to saying, do the right thing for that customer, help with what you can. We trust you to make those decisions, and don't ever feel like you would ever be chastised for making a wrong decision. We may ask you not to do that again, but if there's a decision to it, and it gives me a certain amount of ownership to be able to say, I can help these people out, which is a great. I'm able to discharge that, so to speak. But from my perspective, it was always a case of training was a paramount, because to go learn to do the job properly then helped me understand what I can and can't offer customers, and being able to then push back certain things on a customer, say, I can't do that for you, but here's what you can do instead, which frees up my capacity to help more people. I'll always try and help as many possible people as I can, but when there's an option to say, cut me the middleman out, I'm still there to support you, for instance. However, come back to me if you need to, but this is the direction you could go with this initially. Looking at the ASB toolkits, in that case, how you could potentially resolve this issue to start with before I get involved in it was a key one for us, for instance. But I'm more than happy to be there to support and guide you, but there are different ways to look at trying to sort it. But this job will always be complicated. It will always naturally be complicated, and especially when I'm in a generic role, I have 6 or 7 different hats on a daily basis, going from compliance to working within and helping out our lettings team, letting properties, onto rents, then onto ASB, then onto generic housing officer issues, as well as then estates inspections, health and safety. It is a naturally complex position. But training is key, but having supportive managers and colleagues and teams is a great thing. Having a great culture within an organization is something that we thrive off. And yeah, basically, I think I've found myself in a career where I've never felt so comfortable, having done 10 or 12 years working within debt collection industries, where I very rarely hit a target to save my life, because I didn't have that possibility of being able to, morally, I wanted to help people, not argue that you pay my debt over someone else's. So I went from that sector into a sector where I could build long-term relationships with people, and I could not feel more comfortable working here. And Accent has given me that opportunity to try and help people as much as I possibly can, which I'll be forever grateful for.
And you can see the point from Hannah, which is saying knowing what you can and can't offer customers is so important. Knowing where your boundaries can begin and end in an environment which is prone to blurred lines. I think that's something that the sector does struggle with more broadly. And Andrew Hart, just for that, which is a really important point, said, I think having managers with experience of the role is really important. I was a housing officer for 18 years before I became a manager. I burned out in 2022, and it took months before I could function and return to the job I loved. In 23, I could no longer maintain the increasing pressure, 50% larger patches, increased responsibility, stepped away, took a break, and I now manage a housing team where I see the workload and support is the main part of my job to manage. I make no friends with managers who try to put more on them when I know they're at the limit. And the reason I say it's important is A, that lived experience is absolutely vital, but B, I've got a session next month with an operations manager who's coming on to ask whether or not social housing experience is vital when we're recruiting in the sector. How important is housing experience when looking at roles? And I think what Andrew said there is definitely a really important part of the argument. But equally, as you say, sometimes it can make you challenge really in terms of the mindset of where we are. I want to do a quick whistle-stop tour of the chat, but Jim, I know you've had your hand up for a while, so if you can make a very quick point, Jim, if you want to come in.
Well, yes. Well, firstly, Chris, I like what you're doing, but to me, what you're doing is basically good old-fashioned time management and journey planning. You're planning your day, you're planning your work, just in time. In effect, stuff is you know what you're doing, you're prioritizing it. That's great, but like people are saying, if you don't have that autonomy, you can't do it, can you? The other thing is, I worked 30 odd years, 20 odd years in care work as an auxiliary nurse, as a care worker. When it got too much for me, because at the time I was probably the only male auxiliary within the country at the time. There weren't many at all. It was all women working on wards. I was always getting called in when I lived in and that, you know. So what I do is I get out of it for a bit and go into sales and marketing. So when I felt fresh again, I go back into it. But we can't always do that. But that was how I dealt with the burnout and stress, and it becoming a 9 to 5 instead of a vocational job. Okay, thanks. Well, that's news.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks very much. So in terms of the whistle-stop tour, some of the points we've missed on the chat before I go to you for final thoughts, Chris, today. I've asked those already. Absolutely brilliant. So there was a point made around kind of access to information that's behind the CIH paywall, the NatFed paywall, it being so expensive, that being the only way to be a housing professional is through membership to these organisations. I think that's a challenging one as well, in terms of, you know, there needs to be a way for these businesses to fund themselves as well. But equally, you know, whether tenants should have free access is a really interesting discussion. Edwina said within nursing, we have clinical supervision, caseload supervision, management supervision, either within or outside the organisation designed to avoid burnout. And I think that really speaks highly to what you're trying to do there, Chris. Rachel said, I think it's key to recognise the warning signs in yourself that things are getting on top of you. I think that's wonderful if you can. I don't think it's always available for everybody. I think sometimes you don't realise until it's almost too late. Let's have a quick look through some of these. Clara said, we need to start with purpose, which means considering what actions will move you closer to fulfilling your purpose, which means the organisation and every role in the organisation needs clarity on its core role. And I think this is where that goes back to that point we made earlier. What is within your remit and what isn't? What needs to be passed on? What's actually achievable? But what is stuff that you'd love to be able to help with but can't always? And sometimes I think housing officer roles particularly attract people who want to do everything they can for everybody, which is great. But it's understanding where those limits are yourself and being quite, unfortunately, sometimes quite regimented in those is always going to be a balance. There's a question which came through from Gary Snedden. Hi, Chris, in your opinion, is there anything that can be done technology-wise to lighten the load on housing officers that's not currently commonplace? And just before I kind of get you to answer that one and your final thoughts, there was a message from Paula which said the challenge you have, Chris, is that everyone works differently. They have ADD and can struggle to stick to the diary that I create to myself. I'll get it done, but things are constantly moving. And I suppose we do have to look at that neurodivergent capacity as well when looking at stuff like time management, etc. I'll just see if there's any more points that have kind of come on more recently. So Liz Williams, we need trauma counselling for staff available as the housing crisis deepens and terrible things and risks are growing in number. Dealing with traumatic experience is growing. I'm deeply concerned how Susie Lampler is being forgotten. The absence of safety measures for staff on home visits is dreadful. I was sent into Fred West Brothers' home once shortly before he was arrested. A convicted, I can't say that word else, it'd be picked up by the YouTube thing and get the video banned, but our house, and had to deal with a tenant threatening me with a baseball bat over some tiling. Not enough organisations are protecting the staff adequately. And yeah, I mean, we talked that point around managers already. I think I've covered most of the points that have come up. Apologies if I have missed everybody because we're down to the last couple of minutes. But I guess there is that question, Chris, around technology to lighten the load and maybe what you're doing at Accent Group. But more importantly, how do people get in touch and how do people carry on the conversation from here if they'd like to for you?
But yeah, technology is always going to help. We're always advancing things. We're always doing different things from Accent's point of view as well. Where I work, there's certain things from hardware to software and whatnot. I sometimes rely on, if I'm trying to type ASB letters, for instance, one of the biggest things I often do these days, instead of searching through Google and whatnot for examples and whatnot, I'm often referring to AI and whatnot to actually go looking for the information for me to bring it all to me and encapsulate things. That's been a massive tool for me when I'm looking for examples of something. I don't go looking for it anymore. I ask it to come to me, and that saves me a massive amount of time when I'm trying to use examples for situations of antisocial behaviour. So if I could point one thing out to try something differently, that might be something to look at doing. But in relation to contacting me, if anything I could do to potentially get involved with you, if anything to just direct or just to try and help more than anything else, I'm more than happy to. You can find me through LinkedIn as well, and you'll see my mug in that case appear on LinkedIn. I can quite happily share it on any of Matt's groups, but if you look at Matt's page, I'm linked through there as well. Give me a shout, drop me a message on there, and I would quite happily catch up with you. If you're local, face to face, fantastic. I mean, I'm located around the Nottinghamshire patch, but digitally, more than happy to get in contact. And if I can share anything else that might help you, bring you back from the brink, or anything to do that possibly that I do something quite differently, in that case, I would more than happily share. But yeah, like I say, even if you just fancied a chat one day, just to realign your priorities and whatnot, I would happily do that. And that's my persona. I want to be here to help people, whether you're a customer, a colleague, or just anybody else that's on this call. Yeah, basically, I'm here if you need me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very, very much, Chris. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you for coming on today and sharing it from, very much that kind of actual, this is the day-to-day job I'm living experience. And I think sometimes that's missed. Next week is a bit of a different shift. So we've got Kate Dodsworth, Chief of Regulatory Engagement, Chief of the Regulator, coming on to talk about TSM's 1 year on. So if you'd like to be involved in that, please, use the same link you used this week. If you're watching the recording, reach out to me and jump on. But for now, Chris, a massive thank you to you. Best of luck with the rest of your accent career and everything else going forward. And I'm certain we'll catch up again soon. But cheers, and look forward to speaking in the near future. Cheers, Chris.